I'm speaking from Eastern Ontario, where it's sunny at 6 o'clock, and it's been a strange sort of winter, spring that never seems to decide what it wants to be. But I live in absolutely beautiful territory, which is the unceded ancestral territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, where as Michael Sandler has heard me say before, I get to live an embarrassingly privileged life and to walk about the land freely. It's amazing, and I'm grateful for it every day. National Nursery Week this year, for the first time, is being sponsored, and that's helpful in times when finances are difficult for organizations. And we're extremely grateful to Johnson and Johnson, who, after our first request, stepped up to fund, I should say, the entire week for us, so that we didn't have to think about, worrying whether we could pay another few dollars for a speaker and so on. So I'm really very grateful. They've been great partners through many, many years with nursing, especially on nursing leadership. And I do want to acknowledge how important that was. You saw the poster on Joanne's slide, and I'll talk a little bit about it today. I want to say up front that answering the call is not about a calling, because we've had a little bit of concern about that. And that, a calling means you're called to nursing so you don't have to be paid very well, your working conditions don't have to be very good, that history. That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that we watched nurses this year answer the call to action, to care, to teach, to advocate, you name it. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today, and hopefully it'll resonate. I will invite you to two events coming up. There's two that I can remember for sure this week. It seems like a really busy week because we released our new mantra video today, our new branding video. Video from the Prime Minister as well, one from our President. So it's been a busy kind of day so far. But certainly I hope you'll join us at noon Eastern time, so 9 in BC, for a great talk on Wednesday by Karen Furno, who's the world champion and Olympian in speed kayaking, I think is the right term. She's just lovely. And being an athlete, she's faced some challenges. Goals and needing to endure and have stamina and so on. And we thought she'd be a great person to talk with us this year. And then on Friday, we have a panel that's going to talk about substance use in the health professions and how difficult it is for some of us to say we like too much Grey Goose or other substances. There's a someone from the police department talking about what they're doing. It's a nurse, actually, and people from different groups talking about the challenge that poses for many of us. So I hope you'll join us for some of those. So I'm going to look back a little bit, because we can't talk about Nursing Week and cakes and parties and stuff. People will think we're completely crazy when there's all this chaos around us in the world. So 2020 was to be the year of the nurse and the midwife. I'm sure you know this. We've talked about it ad nauseum. We worked with the WHO to get, ICN and national nursing organizations, to get that set up so that 2020 would be celebratory. And it was anchored around the 200th birthday of Florence Nightingale. And I know there's controversy and really rich discussions now around some of what she did that could be seen as quite racist and quite negative. But nevertheless, that was the reason originally for the timing of that year. And we had many, many plans, went to a lot of work, and it was going to be, of course, some serious stuff, but also some, something lighter to thank nurses. And then on just as the cusp of the year change was going to happen, came this nasty little worrying headline on New Year's, and I'll let you read it. And so some of us who were watching just thought, well, that's weird, or that looks worrying, or maybe it's nothing, there was a range of reactions to it. However, I don't need to tell you, it played out that we should have been worried. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail. I just want to remind us how quickly things unfolded. So 23 days later, we're getting pictures like this from Wuhan, excuse me. And that kind of stuff scares people, right? I mean, it looks apocalyptic. So that was attention getting. The first time I called Teresa Tam was the 20th, and asked the great question of, not that I asked a great question, but the original great question of science. what is going on here? Like, what do you know about what this is? Because there were a lot of reports starting to leak out. 7 days after that, we have a global health emergency. A little short time after that, it has a name. And 40 days after the emergency, we have a global pandemic. Like, think of how different that is from horses and ships carrying the drug, I was going to say the bug, around in 1918, 1919, and it still swept the earth. So now we have a very condensed timeline in a very busy society. And in our own country, people coming back from March break, like everything's fine, and like a global brush fire. Look at the language. This is the day before the global pandemic. Look how it's kind of softened a bit, right? No need to panic. Most of the cases are mild. Like, it was still kind of being treated like it's not going to be too bad in Canada. And probably, well, it's easy to say hindsight, right? We should have been extremely worried. A couple of months later, 100,000 deaths in the US. And that was, of course, because there was no management of it there, but that indicates how quickly that happened. And by September, end of September, 1 million deaths. So we've, as you know, we're critical sometimes of governments, employers, and so on. This just galloped, I think, in a way that you could almost see people stumbling, saying, how the hell do we rein this in? And the horse is long since out of the barn. As of today, we won't go through all these, but on the left, you see Canada. So we've had 24,000 deaths. Ontario is just a mess. I think it's slightly below 900 today. I checked at ICU, 600 of them ventilated. Entire departments of hospitals that were used to be day surgery, admit and discharge kinds of areas, all here in Ottawa even, full of COVID ICU patients from Toronto. I mean, it's just, the third wave is just, I can't tell you what it's like in Ontario. And now we have a shutdown in Manitoba and a shutdown in Halifax, right? And what CNA has been suggesting to them all from the beginning is pay everybody a minimum wage. So what do you call that? A basic living wage, so they can pay their groceries and whatever they need. Basic. And then shut everything down. Just shut it all down for 6 weeks, right? It only travels with us. That was never going to work in terms of political appetite, and it wouldn't work with the public. But we all know it would have worked, right? It would have helped. And if we'd had our borders shut, the problem is, as long as you got 30,000 people a week coming through Pearson in Toronto from all over the bloody world where there's COVID, like you either got to shut it down and really face this, or it's going to go on for a long time. And I fear it's going to go on with us now for a while. Nurses are tired. I don't need to tell you. We've certainly heard it very clearly. They don't like the hero language, and they don't like to be talked about as angels. And particularly, I've been irked, I guess, by the talk of resilience. And we put a statement out with our critical care nurse colleagues, because they came to us sort of just saying, what can we say to try to help around the country? This was 2 weekends ago, because it was just getting terrible. And, they needed something like 1,800, and God love them. Newfoundland sent 9. And, where do you just find 1,800 critical care nurses? Like, what you wonder sometimes, what's the thought process, that there's no surge capacity before this. And now we've learned a really very worrying lesson, right, about surge capacity in long-term care and acute care and so on. But around the issue of resistance, we just said to media and governments and so on, please don't keep saying it. People who are resilient aren't lying in a corner crying, right? That's something different. They go back every day because they're resigned to it. They need the money, they endure, they have stamina, they have courage. It's not resilient though, right? Resilient is a bounce back. And that's why we're trying to shape some of our response to this in that light. So this backdrop has led to, perversely, some good things and a lot of action on the part of nurses. And the first thing was that, as you know, less than 11 months after China reports some strange flu on New Year's Eve, we've got a vaccine, and it works. And ironically, people don't want to take it because it works well and it worked fast. So for the first time, we didn't do what we did with AIDS or malaria and have, a few people in different labs with a bit of grant money trying to find a cure. The whole world turned to the same problem at the same time. The technology's better. They were all funded. They had open source kinds of science, and they got a vaccine. And it's miraculous piece of science. And now people say, "Wow, there must be something wrong with it," right? They're injecting chips, or it wasn't tested. And the fact is, they harnessed every modern piece that they needed to produce the very outcome that we wanted. And now, of course, we can all get it. The rollout has been spectacularly, epically awful in some places. I couldn't tell you on any one day. I mean, I'm in a job where I do pay attention. I don't know what the rule is in Ontario today. I haven't got the first clue because it changes, right? And I know that science evolves, but I have to say, just between us, when the person from the National, what's NACI, Advisory Committee on Immunization. So here's on my radio, Dr. Bonnie Henry saying, take the first thing you can get. They played them back to back on purpose. She's fabulous, by the way, or she seems to be. Take whatever you get. That's the message. 2 seconds later, this is about a week ago, you'll remember, the person from NACI said, well, if you are worried about the clots, then you might want to. And I thought, oh, no, you're tumbling the whole house that we've worked all this time. You've convinced us finally as nurse leaders to share a certain message, and then it just collapses. Anyway, I haven't got mine yet because I wasn't allowed in Ontario, even though I have high risk issues and I'm old as hell. I'm getting my first shot on the 28th. Can't wait. It was supposed to be today, Joanne, I'll share with you, but I thought this will be the one time I get a reaction and I'll be sick as hell and I won't be able to do that BC talk at 6 o'clock on the Monday. So I moved it. So I want you to know I did self-sacrifice. That's a miracle. Nurses have been unbelievable in all this. So every time they were called to, whether it was to help in long-term care, to, I hate the word pivot, to change something about your practice, come out of retirement. Can we move students more quickly in? Can we move some surgical nurses into a step-down ICU, that sort of nurses over and over and over, not always happily, and often warning, this could be trouble, but did it, answered the call to make sure that the public was safe. And I can't tell you, watching it, how sort of proud making it was to watch nurses across the country respond to this thing. And I don't mean that we don't see how terrible it is and the stress, but nurses stepped up. So did doctors. I mean, we have to say, nurses didn't do it alone. In the middle of all this, we had a couple of pretty ugly incidents, one of which involved Mrs. Echaquan in Quebec, as you'll recall, filmed by herself, I think the day or several hours before she ultimately died, and nurses misbehaving, to say the least. Racist, unbelievable. So our response has been this, and nurses are responding right across the country when we talk about it. First of all, the public says, it's a high priority. You've got to get this fixed. So, okay, we did that polling through Nanos at CNA. So, okay, so we're not out wandering on our own thinking that we can just fix this problem. We pulled groups together from across the country, the union, Kunza, that's nursing students, cause in the schools. I'm going to blank on all we call the C groups in Ottawa that lead nursing, and have prepared a nursing declaration against anti-Indigenous racism with some principles in it, and then some actions that we want to take so that we put some meaningful steps forward to try to tackle this really ugly injustice. We have an Indigenous Leaders series in which a leader each season of the year, so that following the summer, winter, fall seasons for a quarter, spend some time with our board, our staff, and with the public around these issues. So our current guest, who's unbelievable, is Carrie Nuku from New Zealand. She's the Maori they have a co-president model. She's the Maori co-president of the New Zealand Nurses Organization. And we're just finalizing our invitations to Eileen Laflamme, who will be well known to many of you, from British Columbia, to spend the summer with us. And she will speak on the equinox in September. Carrie, by the way, will speak on the summer solstice in June. And I'll invite you, and you can share this out. And then we're delighted about the Honorable Murray Sinclair, you will know, wrote the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. I'm trying to talk too fast. And who will be with us in the fall. We're just finalizing all these negotiations, and he will be our ambassador, and he will speak publicly in December. And the intention is to learn from people, like learn different perspectives about how your board feels and functions and how your hiring is. And then the much harder work, what is it that CNA can do about racism across nursing, across healthcare, and so on, that with our minimal resources and so on, what's reasonable to take on and what would be helpful. We also had a strong reaction across the country from Black, Brown, and other people of color in the wake of the murder of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis. Suddenly that sounds wrong. In the United States. And when CNA came out swinging in a sense and said, like, enough, this is a public health emergency, because we'd heard from nurses across the country about their experiences, we had a huge reaction, probably bigger than we'd had in a long time, positive, from nurses, saying, good, speak up, say more. And so we have a similar declaration we're working on with the same kind of groups of people around how do we tackle this piece. And we talked about, in case you're wondering about all the declarations, we talked about, do you merge? But they're quite different issues and quite different histories. And both groups have said, no, there was a sort of alliance that came together pretty strong in the demonstrations and so on post Mr. Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor and so on in the US, but treat them as different things. So we followed that advice. I'll share with you that we have an unbelievable group of international advisors in our work against anti-Black racism. And they come from a number of countries and have been so helpful in helping us to chart a direction forward. And that ultimately will lead to the first National Summit on Racism in Nursing and Healthcare on November 24th. And Sandy Hudson from Toronto who founded or co-founded Black Lives Matter, is going to be our featured speaker. She lives in Los Angeles now, by the way, doing a PhD in law. She has 2 other master's degrees in different areas. A formidable and interesting woman, and I think she'll lead us in a really great conversation. We heard the need at CNA to just provide some inspiration and some learning around leadership. So there's a number of leadership course opportunities you can find on our site. Excuse me, even though we were pretty shut down, like everybody during 2020, we said we're going to do a bunch of things in that special year and did nothing. I mean, we didn't do nothing. We didn't do those, right? So no convention, no special meeting at Rideau Hall for the Fellows of the Academy. Like, it all just, what happened. So we're trying this year to get back on track and build back to some different future. And you may be interested in the global change makers. We're asking people who are creating change and making change to speak to nurses about a variety of topics. We've already had Andre Picard. You'll know he's the national reporter for the Globe and Mail on health. Spoke about his new book, which is observations and so on around what happened in long-term care. Karen Furno this week, the Olympian I told you about. Lori Gottlieb, who's the guru of strengths-based leadership, to talk about leadership and strengths in nursing. And Richard will start the fall season talking about the sort of interface between robotics and artificial intelligence and compassionate care and extending nurses' reach through technology. And I talked about Sandy already. We asked Nick Nanos and his team to ask the public when they did the polling. The polling was around October, I want to say, so it was sort of in the heart of COVID, excuse me. And you can see again, overwhelmingly, the public said nurses should be involved in policy development, and they usually say that. So we at CNA have had our busiest year ever in terms of advocacy around issues like long-term care, around virtual care. We were joking before you all came on, like one of our pieces of advocacy was just before you all came on, I had to turn to use my hotspot on the iPhone because I live 1 hour from downtown Ottawa, and it might as well be, the middle of the Sahara. Like it's very hit and miss. And we said many times to whoever would listen in governments, you can't run a big virtual care system and a whole pile of people working at home now, on sort of 1920s technology. You need to invest in infrastructure. And by infrastructure, by the way, we also talked about electronic records, unique identifiers, like get rid of the fax machines, right? It was sort of that. You've got Star Trek over here in the operating room, and Fred and Barney running around writing down the notes. Like you just can't run a virtual care system on that technology. We talked, of course, about our concerns about mental and emotional health, and I don't know about you, but mine's not good. Like I'm not going to hurt myself. That's just not me. But I've never felt so fried. Like it's just getting to the point of being fried is the only word I can think of. The aloneness for so long. We've been working at home since March last year, March 13th, or whatever that day was that they declared it. And I've been isolating because I have some health concerns that I thought I was worried about. And it just goes on and on. So, and I'm good alone. So I always think, how are people managing who aren't so good on their own, or who really love going to an office, that sort of thing. So we've spent a lot of time talking with governments about mental health. And by the way, one of the practical things is it's hard to get and it's expensive. So open it up to psychotherapists and other people and just pay for it. Like stop making people pay $200 an hour. Just say for the next 5 years to invest in, post-COVID, societal health, we'll pay. We're not there yet. And then of course there was issues underneath all this public face of things like antimicrobial resistance and medical assistance in dying. And we were swamped with work around MAID in all this. And I won't go on except to say that in round one, they didn't invite any nurses. And we just I thought I was going to have a rage stroke. So eventually, we got them to invite us to be witnesses at the House and then the Senate. And, you get into the loop. But anyway, I'm not going to go on except to say that all went on and we answered the call. We did the best we could advocating around the country. We met with all the leaders, of course. Well, not as many as would meet with us. We didn't meet with Mr. Trudeau because that's not that reasonable. And we met with his senior staff, senior staffer, which was terrific, and ministers and so on. So we talked about you. We talked about COVID and the sort of response that would be needed in the budget to make it a success for people. In the end, we met with 75, the board, when I say we, and me, I'm the only employee of the board, met with, it says 55 here, but in the end, it was 75 members of parliament through February and March, to make the case about what we thought should be in the budget around long-term care and long-term care standards and more funding for seniors, funding for mental health, funding for virtual care, the things I just talked about, anti-racism. We had 7. Of course, I'm not going to remember them all. And in the end, actually, I don't say that this happened because we did this, but all that we asked for was there. I mean, they didn't want to bite on ramping up the Canada Health transfer. And because that's a per capita transfer, if you have a province or a city or wherever that has a lot more old people, your expenses are going to be higher. And so that's why we wanted you got to increase, because society is aging. People are going to need more money. They say 20% more roughly over 10 years. And they haven't done that yet. But I did hear Mr. Trudeau saying once the immediate vaccine fire is out, they'll turn to talk about that. So we hope that happens. As a result of the hard work of the team, not just me, of course. I mean, I get the public face because I'm so cute. But it's very much a team effort. And you can see here a comment made by Samantha after I spoke with her in an interview. And I put this in because I want nurses across the country, and I hope members and future members to know that it does matter who notices what you're doing. If you're trying to influence people at the real coalface of decision making federally around MAID, for example, very important decisions around the criminal code, or around whether or not they're going to enforce standards in long-term care when some provinces are saying we don't need them, and they quite clearly do, by the way, but that's a thing for another day. Then it's important to be seen to have the ear of people in government. And sorry, Michael, I showed this in your class the other day. So Michael Sandler, you've seen this before, but this is the second time in 3 years that we were put in the top 100 lobbyist list. And I think it's important for nurses to be seen there, not just physicians. CMAs often are almost always there, as they should be. They're very good at what they do, medical association. But seeing nursing there now, 2018, whatever it was, I can't remember, 2019 and 2021, I think, starts to cast us in a different level of access to decision making. And nurses, we often say we're not at the policy table, or we don't have influence. And I say to students, it's not true. You don't always get what you want. It's a different problem, but it doesn't mean you're not heard. And yes, sometimes we have to fight for it, and it frustrates me that some, God love them, CBC love their doctors. They'll talk for 2 hours to a physician from an ICU about nurse staffing in a long-term care setting, as though that's completely normal. And so we keep going back and saying, good show. You might have maybe invite a nurse to that sometime. Anyway, we go. I'm getting close to the end. I promise. Whoever's watching the time, I know you want to leave some time for some questions. We, of course, had to answer the call collectively around nursing practice questions. We produced, and Joan almost wrote for us. Joan was our scholar in residence since 2018, still is. She's a prof at Queen's in Kingston, Ontario, and she produced the Regulated Nursing in Canada document for us, which really is a really encyclopedic look at what are the 4 categories, what are their areas of practice, what's their education, how are they regulated. The intention is for, if you didn't know anything about nursing, you can find a lot of the answers there. And what we're going to do is take this, it's a dense narrative, and that's not a complaint about Joan, that's what we asked for. We're going to take that and work with her to produce some tools that we think will be helpful to policymakers around decision making about how do you deploy workforces, where do you want LPNs versus, I don't know, a registered psych nurse, or a nurse practitioner versus RN, that sort of thing. We supported the Nursing the Future initiative, which is really a wrap of the arms around the COVID generation of graduates to try to help them to sustain the transfer from school, which is tough anyway, and into workplace settings that are sometimes in total disarray, and with people that are very, very tired and so on, working in those settings. And that we're hoping for funding to continue that for 3 years, because you don't charge people anything for it. So we have to find some way to sustain that. And we have strengthened the certification program and made it more accessible by reducing the number of hours and so on that are required to take the specialty certification program. Last couple of points. One is you had asked me to speak a little bit about nursing now, and I won't go speak about that in great length. This is BC at the Women Deliver, in conjunction with the Women Deliver Conference in June of 2019, pardon me, in Vancouver. And we did the launch of Nursing Now Canada there, and Canada's commitment was to work in 3 areas: to strengthen nursing policy, the care of Indigenous people, really cultural safety and that side of things, so people can feel they can even go into a healthcare system safely. And quite clearly, many can't, right? We've seen filmed. I'm still stunned by the 2 pieces I've seen on film of nurses with those patients. And finally, to strengthen nursing leadership. The nursing policy piece is going well. I believe we will see a chief nurse reinstated. It's been some time, and I think the federal government has seen the potential value of not just having a chief medical officer, but having a senior nurse to talk about. And just for people who don't know, a chief nurse isn't there to advocate for more nurses or better pay. Like, they're not a lobbyist. They're there to help explain health systems and policy from a nursing lens. And when would we have ever needed that more, right, than during the past year? There's a nice initial document, really good framework done by CAUSE in the Schools of Nursing with CNA, the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association, in tandem around strategies, excuse me, for nursing education to respond to the calls to action. It's a really good framework. I think you'll find it very practical. And we developed and established the Canadian Academy of Nursing at CNA to take on the challenges of, a leadership hub that helps to identify nursing leaders, bring them together, give them places to talk, connect, some courses, communities of practice, to help novice and emerging leaders who want to become an executive or a dean, that sort of thing. And there's a fellowship program where you can become a fellow of the Academy through a nomination process. And we installed the first 60 last year. So I think we more than delivered on the Nursing Now campaign for Canada. And excuse me, it will end, it's going back to ICN. And we are not going to continue, we're going to continue some of these activities, but not under the moniker of Nursing Now, which will sit within ICN. And you still need to send reports and so on, because we don't have time. We've done everything we said we would do, and we've got more projects to go. Much of the work around the world, very important, is countries that sometimes don't even have regulation, right? So they need a longer term sort of support around how you treat women. Well, we probably need that too. But places with no women's rights at all, not regulated and so on. So I think Nursing Now, some of that will continue meaningfully for some of them. Joanne, I think this is my last point, and it's almost 1:45 here. At CNA itself, we heard you across the country around the need to be more nimble, more responsive, engage more with members. And so the membership changes that we're recommending at the AGM in June is that the old jurisdictional model where, for example, when I register to my license every year, I become a member of the professional association at the same time. That was historically the model in BC too. BC's changed lately, I fully understand, but that's basically how the country has run. And that's really disappearing everywhere except for a couple of jurisdictions. So we've recommended going to a one person, one vote parliamentary model. You vote, you become a member, you have voting rights and so on. And we have decided to downsize the board from 19 to 8. Well, it'll be between 7 and 11, but we're suggesting 8 the first year. The family doctors, for context, downsized from 40 to 10. So there is a trend to smaller skills-based boards that are sort of easier to manage and make decisions on a fast pace. But we will have 5 councils, and I hope some of you will be interested in taking part, to provide advice to the board on regulated nursing. What's the vision for the future of nursing in the country? Indigenous relations, which is never not going to be an issue in our lifetimes. There's a lot of work ahead, so that's critical. An anti-racism council, a francophone council to help us to think about what might be special needs or services for the 85,000 French-speaking nurses in the country, and a specialty nursing council that looks at the future of specialty nursing practice. So I'll close just by saying thank you for what you've done this year. It's, we're far away from it, far away from the point of care is what I mean, but have been deeply immersed in this from the get-go, trying to do what we could as an association. I mean, that's our role, to be supportive of nurses and nursing. And when I would just say, in terms of how at the wall people seem to be hitting a wall and talking about like very, very severe levels of distress. There was a study this week out of U of T, it's not even published yet, around distress levels in nursing and medicine, and it was staggering. I mean, it's out of all proportion to I feel tired or I'm a little burned out. It's like profession wide, really, in both professions. And when my partner died from suicide, I was quite destroyed after that. And I remember it's about 7 months later, very wise psychotherapist, was a nurse actually, became a psychotherapist, said to me one day, you need to pull yourself together here. Just listen to me for a minute. And she was older, so she could get away with that. And she said, you need to step back here because we don't want you to die from somebody else's disease. And that really got my attention, really got my attention. Wow, that's profound. And I hope that you will not reach that point, and that, you know, nothing, this isn't worth dying over, and it's not worth your health or having a heart attack or whatever, you know, things happen when people are under extreme stress. It's easy for me, I understand, to say, to, you know, practice self-care, but nobody will practice it for us. And I include myself. I'm really bad at it. Working too many hours, tired all the time. But we are going to have a very long played out consequence from all this, I fear, if we can't somehow find some of that in ourselves. So thank you for all you're doing. And I was hoping to show the We Answer the Call video, but it's so challenging over Zoom and getting the sound right and so on, that I would just invite you, if you go to the CNA website, you can see the link to, it's probably the We Know a Nurse campaign. I think it says on the opening, you know, when those things, they roll by, I can't remember what that's called, the 4 different topics of the week. And you can tell how knowledgeable I am about terminology. And under the We Know a Nurse and the Nursing Week campaign, you can click on there and see the new video that was released at noon today. And I hope the notion of why we use this term, which we spent since, well, a year and a half or more, slowly developing through consultation, why it ended up being the new mantra of CNA. So I'm happy to, first of all, thank you, Joanne and team, for inviting me. And I will stop the share, and I'm happy to talk or listen or take questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was a great presentation, and sounds like there's been an incredible amount of work happening over the past year since we've last connected in with CNA. And yeah, so you definitely are answering the call, and so appreciative of hearing about the upcoming changes around governance too. That's very exciting work. And I know being from BC that we really appreciate that you heard those messages as well around our inclusion. And I did put in the chat just to see if there were any questions, and I'll also include the link to the CNA mantra video as well.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah.
Well, you know, around the governance changes, the two main impetus for the change, Joanne, was first all the dual mandate professional regulatory associations basically tumbling right into just being regulatory colleges across the country. So the writing was on the wall. But it was also BC, because BC was really the impetus for the speed with which we took on opening the membership. And many people here may know that, but others may not. So when I was hired, which was, I started in May of 2017, I had said during the interviews, you got to open the door. Like, we can't have this club thing go on anymore. But then BC made a decision to have a single association of the 4 groups, which was brilliant, because then it would have forced us to throw BC out, because you had non-RNs in your membership. And it really moved the conversation along really smartly and quickly. And as you know, it took a full year, but the vote was 135 to 10, all by RNs. So it was a slam dunk, you know, that really said, okay, the ship is going to get turned on its side here now in a different direction. So these are the bylaws responding to some of that creates a place for different people at the table and tumbles out the old model. I think it's going to be exciting. And we have a position for a vice president, which we've never had before. It's a Kamala Harris position. You're not intended to go into the presidency. So there's the president-elect that becomes the president, and there's a vice president for 2 years. And we want people from different regulated categories, different ethnocultural backgrounds, and so on. And now, because we can choose the board, or the board is elected as a one-to-one versus who comes from the jurisdiction, and they're all perfectly lovely, smart people, but you don't get the same choice as an individual, right? To say, I want Joanne in that seat, or I don't.
Mhm. Interesting time. Lots of change underway, it sounds like. And
Well, it was so tiring, Joanne, I've had to say, for the staff, God love them, because we were in the middle of this giant turmoil of CNA, and turmoil in a good way, but change is messy and unpleasant, right? And they're already tired, and they think, what is this idiot doing who's making all this change? And then to get slammed with COVID, and even things like the sudden decision of the Quebec Superior Court, which then tumbled the old decision on MAID, and sort of moved it. It just, everything just converged at one time. I've never been so busy in my life in a job, and my team just 24/7, crazy.
it sounds like it.
Michael, who do you think, what do you think are the key priorities for nurses post-pandemic? Um, well, that's a logical question. Um, we are going to have to spend some time, I think. I don't know how we'll do it totally yet, Natasha, to stabilize this workforce that has been completely destabilized. So one of the things we've talked about with federal government is, could you find a way to sit with the provinces and territories and talk finally about some sort of national health human resources strategy? I mean, we just go on saying, well, UBC should have this many seats, and U of T, well, they're good, so they have 175. Like, it doesn't ever seem to match the demand or the areas where we need. And we've got bazillion peds nurses. Try to find one for gerontology, right? So if we could, I think we're going to have to do some work there. I think we're going to have a workforce that's feeling pretty decimated, and the applications to seats in schools of nursing are up as much as 80%. So that's good. We need to find the money to put them in the seats, because the old birds like me are going to go, right? I'm the back end of the baby boom. I'm 62. Like, we're not going to last much longer. So there is going to be a natural big exodus of nurses, but this is going to push them faster. So I think we've got major HHR challenges, including in public health, Natasha, is my gut feeling after this. And I think there's going to be a lot of anger that we're going to have to somehow manage. And it's right across society. The amount of grief and loss and pissed off and lost my job and couldn't be with my mother when she died, and nurses witnessing all that. I just think we got some long-term mental health stuff to think about here. So for me, Natasha, I'm not trying to give a silly answer. I think there's going to have to be some taking stock and stabilizing so we don't repeat this. I don't know if you think that makes sense, but I'm concerned about it.
Yeah, I definitely support the broader thinking about the health human resource planning more broadly. And I know there's another question here around sense of how many nurses have left the profession in this past year because of their exhaustion. That's from Carol Wilson.
Well, it's interesting, Carol. We've heard this thing that for example, Quebec, there's this 4,000 nurses walked out. There's a shortage of nurses. I said, there's not a shortage of nurses. They didn't die. There's a shortage of jobs. They're jobs that they're willing to do. So you turn it around, right? So pay, different working conditions. Those nurses didn't all become nurses to just leave. So I think we need to retain the ones we can through superb working conditions. And, in many labor markets, when you're having trouble in a part of the labor market, you make the conditions better, the pay better, and so on. Well, long-term care it's craziness. Let's make the pay worse. Let's make it unattractive. Let's make it not fun, and no professional development, and well, you're not great leadership. Well, nurses aren't stupid. They just walk with their feet. Those nurses largely walked out of long-term care. So I think we have we need to have a big, gigantic national conversation, and it's going to be FPT craziness, and it's the federation and the jurisdictions. We're going to have to get around that and sit down and talk about this. Somebody asked a question in the Q&A. I don't know if you want me to pick it up. It was
The second question there, yeah.
yeah, about sharing stories. So CNA, if it's any help, CNA is helping to sponsor a group, excuse me, an initiative called Nurses Voices. And we're going to be looking for people in different areas right across the country over the coming few months. Already we do some of that at the Canadian Nurse. And one of the most successful things we did was right after the George Floyd incident, we published I think there was 7 articles or whatever, somewhere around that, through the month of August. And those nurses did some talking in short videos. We did a behind the mask series where nurses talked about their COVID experience. So I'm sorry, I don't know the name of who asked that, but if you connect with us, we're looking for those kinds of stories, and media's looking, by the way, too, so that we do have some vehicles by which we can maybe help with that.
Thanks for that. I don't see another question at this point. Maybe I will see, Natasha, if you're able to come off mute, if you have any closing remarks or comments. And Michael Sandler, if you're able to unmute as well, maybe we can get a few remarks from yourself as well before we close out the session. Oh.
Sure. Thanks, Joanne. Just happy Nursing Week from me to everybody, and a thank you to Michael for coming and sharing your thoughts for us. It's very, very much appreciated, and it's good for us to take the time out to think about that, not only the last year, but also what the future looks like for nursing as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for all you've been doing. Michael Sandler's going to tell me not to swear. It's the first thing he always says to me. There's students coming. Don't swear. Are you there, Sandler? He can't get on.
He said he can't get off mute.
Oh, shoot.
It's too bad.
Kim has locked him down today. All right.
We'll talk another time, Michael.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to you as well, Mike, and appreciate you taking the time out. I know it's day 1 of Nursing Week and a very busy week ahead for you.
More to go.
So appreciate you being here, sharing your vulnerabilities. And I think really the key message around the self-care, you know, this hasn't been a sprint. This has been a marathon. We're not through the marathon yet, as you said. I'm happy. I did get my vaccine shot.
Oh,
today.
good.
Feeling very happy about that. Celebratory, in fact. But
Joanne, I heard a marathoner on CBC. It was very interesting. They were using the sprint versus marathon, and the interviewer was saying something about this marathon, and the marathoner said it's not a marathon because a marathon has an end.
Yeah.
And that's why this is harder. Like if we thought it would finish on June 21st, we could probably all suck it up for another 2 months, right? So I thought that was such an astute observation.
It is true. Yeah, we don't know exactly when it will end or if it will end, but I think we'll have better ways in which to adapt and cope with it than we do currently. And especially our hearts are with all those nurses and everyone in Ontario and the other provinces that have seen that uptick in cases and ICU cases as well. But yes, so thank you again very much, and for sharing all the insights of all the great work that CNA is doing, and really appreciate it. And thank you from the Nursing Policy Secretariat, NNPBC, and from Sigma Zeta for joining us today in BC. Thank you.
Delighted. Happy Nursing Week, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you for inviting me.